Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
GameStop employees of Reddit, what are some of your horror stories? True horror story. I had been ASM since 2005, but in 2007 in a different GameStop a couple of miles from my store, another ASM was opening the store when one of her seasonal hires knocked on the back door. She let him in, and while she had her back turned to him, he grabbed a big bag that we use for consoles and put it over her head, suffocating her. He left her body in the back room and grabbed a whole bunch of systems and ran out. One of the regulars alerted corporate when the store hadn't been open by 10 and the store manager came in and found her body. Thankfully, but horrifically, the idiot didn't delete the backroom security camera footage, so the manager was able to ID the employee to the police officers. He was captured in Mexico a few months after. This was our worst nightmare as ASM and SM females. I quit soon after when I was not allowed to carry my gun, even with a concealed license to carry in Texas. For horror stories come to mind, a woman comes in to trade in an old Xbox 360 in a box. I open the box and the smell hits me. Rat droppings, grime, cockroaches, and all have spent time in this thing. Luckily, my manager noticed, and we were able to decline the trade. Spent 5 minutes disinfecting the counter before I helped the next customer. One time I was trading in a PS4, I think. We were chatting while I was wiping his hard drive and commenting on all his achievements. Sometime during this conversation, he got nostalgic and changed his mind, but not before I had already deleted all his data. Felt terrible. One homeless-looking guy comes in during one of the few times I'm alone in the store. He was dragging around a trash bag, and I was doing my best to keep him in eyesight as he was all kinds of unsure. He managed to stuff an Xbox 360 in the bag and walk out, but I ran out and asked him to give it back, which he did, saying please don't call the cops. I did? The last one kind of shook me. This woman comes in with a gaggle of kids, maybe 4? They were all terrors, running around to various parts of the store, yelling, grabbing things, and rearranging them, seemingly causing distractions while this woman tried on 3 separate occasions to get behind the counter. They end up buying something, but then I notice under this big box the oldest kid has picked up. He'd stuffed his hands full of the little DS games that were on the go-back section on the counter. There was more here, but I've lost some of the details, but it really gave me the impression this was all coordinated by their mother. It's one thing to see adults steal, to see kids who are encouraged to do so, just terribly sad. I was an assistant manager when one of the Madden games came out. 04, maybe? We were doing a big midnight opening for it and everybody was having a wonderful time waiting for the game, which we were picking up from another store about 30 miles away. Around 11 o'clock, after people had been waiting for 2 hours after the mall closed, I got a phone call. The game wasn't coming. I almost broke down, sitting behind the register, dreading the thought of telling everybody that they just wasted their time. To make matters worse, another store within walking distance of us got their games. I just wanted to die that night. I am so grateful that our customers took it well and didn't get too angry. Had a couple come in to return a Sesame Street video game and a controller. They had a receipt from over a year ago, the game was scratched to hell, and the controller was full of dried soda. They said it didn't work anymore, shocker, and were furious when I wouldn't give them their money back. Like standing there screaming at me, I was the manager, so I had no one else there to back me up. It was crazy. Their kid was bawling, the lady was swearing like a syphilitic sailor and the husband couldn't finish a sentence. Fairly sure they were both super high too. So that was fun. When the PS2 came out I was assistant manager, and my manager would sell them out of the backroom at a markup. Such a snake. I took the demo Xbox home with a copy of Halo before the system launched one night and had a 4-player all-night party. One of our other local stores had someone dig through the outside wall and steal everything out of their backroom. One time a woman screamed at me because her kid was tearing open a toy before paying for it and I kindly told him to wait a little bit. She seemed on the fence on whether she wanted to buy the toy or not for her kid, so I wasn't glad that her kid was already ripping it open. She then proceeded to scream at me for being really awful with kids, a horrible person, bad at my job, etc. Also, she wanted to complain to the manager if I ever talked to her kid like that again. She then angrily paid and walked of the store. Also, people tinkering/modding their console and then trying to return it because it doesn't work anymore and angrily insisting on having it bought that way in GameStop. Worked part-time at a GameStop while I was in college. The best story I love to tell is the mom and son story. 40-ish mom and 7-10-ish boy come into the store, in a large strip mall with lots of stores, don't even look at merchandise, come up to the counter and ask to let the kid use the bathroom. Clarified she's not there to buy anything but has spent thousands of dollars in our store previously. We politely tell her we can't let customers use our bathroom because it's in the back of the store with lots of high-priced merchandise. That's the policy. We have cameras and corporate reviews the footage. Another story I have, where I was wrongfully terminated, substantiates that one. Additionally, what we don't tell her is that all the used game consoles that people sell back to us were stored in the bathroom. There was 1 month prior to Christmas I had to do some impressive yoga to get to the toilet. I'm sure those consoles were a gas mat, but I digress. But not to be unsympathetic to this kid's plight, we tell the mom that the pizza place next door lets people use their bathroom if they buy something, and the cheapest thing is a $1 soda/bottle of water. She starts flipping out on us and spewing expletives. Telling us she's paid our salaries 10 times over and that we're going to hell, yada yada, then, no joke, tells her son to just go. Kid actually unzips and pees all over the carpet in front of my register. Then they left. I've never been so grossed out and dumbfounded. Had to close up for the day and half the next day while GameStop paid to have our carpets sanitized. Resulted in a loss of pay for the weekend. Wonder what happened to that kid. He's got to be in his 20s by now. A gentleman comes in to buy one of our old 360 bundles, used, the old system that required the HD. He brings it back a few days later and complains that it doesn't work. We started our normal troubleshooting methods in the store. We couldn't figure anything out. So, I do a swap, take his old system in as defective, then sell him a replacement bundle. I go through and try to wipe the system so we can ship it back to the warehouse. Cockroaches start crawling out of the system instead. I freak out. Throw the system in one of our giant shopping bags, throw that in a box, tape it shut, and throw that in another bag. My manager tells me to just shrink it out, meaning we take the loss, and destroy it in the back. I take it out to the parking lot and have to throw it around to destroy it. These cockroaches freaking scatter like marbles on the floor. I'm dancing around the parking lot on my tiptoes to avoid the flood. It was awful. Not an employee, but I was waiting in line to buy a game, and a guy came in with his 8-ish wife/0 child I assumed was his son, and pointed the kid to the Nintendo section as he went over to PlayStation. I was daydreaming, off in my own world, and it took me a second to realize a moment later that I was hearing water splashing. I turned around to see the kid projectile vomiting all over the floor and the Nintendo games. The employee at the counter, the lady in front of me, and I all just watched this child empty his guts onto the floor, before the father comes up to the son. "You okay, bud?" "Yeah." "Alright, let's get out of here." And without a word or even looking at anyone else, the two leave the store. Once gone, the three of us exchange wild looks, and the employee tells us it's his first day running the store on his own, and he doesn't have any cleaning supplies or know what to do. Poor guy. Parents, please don't let your kids throw up in GameStop. Worked at GS a long time ago, but I'll never forget this one. One night a guy brought in a really dusty and dirty GameCube, wanting cash of course. I asked him if it worked, and he said he didn't know because he hadn't played it in a long time. I told him that we have to check every console, and when I turned it on and opened the lips, about 100 roaches came running out all over the counter. I worked in a store where theft was a quite common occurrence. But this one man. He seized one of the cheap controllers, bizarrely from the back of the store, puts it in his backpack. Then comes over to the counter. He reaches across the counter, opens a drawer, and steals a brand new game out of the drawer, takes it away from the register, opens it, waits in line, trades the game in for $25. Then he asks me to look for something in one of the bottom drawers, and he steals back the game he just traded in a second time. After that he immediately left the store before I could notice he was gone. I got to give him credit, he had some slick balls. So many other unsure things too, but this one I just had to laugh at. I got two stories. Quick one is a guy who would come in all the time to ask to about / buy obscure Vita dating sims and asking inappropriate questions like if the next Dragon Age, at this time would have been Inquisition, was going to finally have sex scenes in it. Next one is New Year's Day. Miserable, I'm working already. It's super early and first customer of the day, of the entire year, is this like 7-foot tall guy who comes in asking for AV cables for a PS4 cause the one he just bought didn't have one. We immediately tell him the PS4 only uses HDMI and so it wouldn't have AV cables, even confirming with him, you mean those red, yellow, and white cables? He starts getting mad and asks again for the cables which we again tell him don't exist. Maybe there's an adapter or something, but I've never seen one and we don't have them here regardless, maybe check Best Buy. Guy immediately starts screaming, you're racists, get me this cable. I'm homeless, I just bought this thing for my grandkids. You're all racists. Thankfully, I froze in fear and confusion and my boss took over and just scooted the guy out the door. Hell of a way to start the year. I used to be the ASM of a GameStop, but nothing really out of the ordinary happened there. Just a lot of lingerers. When I was the manager of a local game store though, there were definitely a lot of wild stories. The one that sticks out the most is this old man we called Psycho Sexy who would come in every Monday morning, try to sell me or whoever was working illegal porn DVDs. He would tell us they were good for busting fat nuts too and that he'd sell her to us super cheap. Every Monday he'd come in, open up his duffel bag of illegal porn, get refused, then leave and come back the following Monday. This went on for almost 3 years. I was hired to help open a new store. A store where the manager was male, and everyone he hired? Female. He was definitely trying to cultivate a hot GameStop kind of situation. Word got around, and we had people coming in to visit ours when they had other stores much closer to where they lived. They didn't really buy anything, they kind of just lurked around for hours at a time, chatting the staff up. There were days when they'd wait for us to close up, that was kind of scary. I was eventually let go for not being friendly enough, which was apparently about 3 months before the manager had a total screaming meltdown during store hours, declared himself High Archangel, threw something at a customer and was later picked up by an ambulance. So, I guess my horror story is the whole damn job. I once had a lady and her teenage son come in to trade in several DVDs and games they had just stolen from the Walmart behind the strip mall where our store was. A Walmart employee called me to ask if they are in my store and says the police officers are on the way, so stall or do what you can to keep them there. I said sure. I told them about the cash versus store credit value of their items without mentioning that I can't even take them because they are still wrapped in cellophane. I walk them around the store and talk about which games are the best value for the money, etc. The police officers show up and ask them to step outside and I just smile and go back behind the counter. They followed the police out and one officer came back a minute later to get the merchandise. Last I heard about it. Not a horror story but definitely weird. Then there was this wealthy couple who had 3 kids and each kid had a Wii, a PS3, and an Xbox 360. They would pre-order every major game that came out for each system, always the deluxe edition. They spent a ton of money in our store. And they were crazy. So abusive to every employee, they cussed at us and called us stupid, they would ask for things they knew they couldn't have and then throw a fit, they would scour their receipts for anything that could be a mistake and make you explain it to them over and over. I went to work at a different company, and they came into my store there, and got in line for my favorite cashier. I immediately called the manager when it was their turn to check out, explained how I knew then and that there was a 99% chance they would make the cashier cry. He went over and just as he got there they were beginning to raise their voices about some supposed mistake. Luckily, that manager is super good at handling people and got them out without letting them get a word in edgewise. I practically had points from dealing with them. I think they got off on abusing people together. They would sometimes laugh as they did it. If they found a legitimate mistake in anything, their faces would just light up. Truly evil people. Former GS employee here. Worked in a store on the edge of a super unsure part of Akron, Ohio. Back in the PS2 era, a guy brought in a box of trades. There were 3 games, Leisure Suit Larry, Playboy, The Mansion, and the Guy game. The rest of the box was nothing but porn on VHS. He was politely asked to leave. He asked us why. My coworker's response had me keeling over, because there's jizz all over your shit. He laughed. This was 2007 or so. GameStop had a used game return policy, 7 days no questions asked, full refund. People would abuse this constantly, like a rental service. We knew it, and we were able to flag people who did it too often and decline them the returns, manager policy, not company policy. Then there was this one, old lady, gaggle of grandkids. Seemed so sweet, and was nice to us while in the store, asking for help, recommendations, etc. Bought them a PS2 and a freaking gigantic stack of games, like had to be 20 to 25 at least. Her total came out over $400. I rang her out, handed her the multiple bags of stuff, and said to the kids something like, "Wow, you guys are lucky to have such a great grandma. These many games will last you months." The grandma chuckled and said, "Oh, they're only in town for the week. You have that 7-day return policy, I'll see you in 6 days." Years ago, 2007-2008-ish, I trained a kid that turned around and robbed the store at gunpoint a month after we fired him for stealing. He and his friends left without shooting anyone. My coworker was on the phone with the police officers after he left while I was getting his old employee file out. Reading off his 2 addresses he had down, parents and grandparents, phone number, etc. He's still serving time as the gun they used was apparently used in another homicide. Edit, longtime lurker only started posting a few weeks ago. Biggest response I've had. But to clarify a few questions I've received the last few hours, don't know who else was killed. I didn't find that out till after I had to go to court and testify. Even then, it wasn't something brought up to me personally. I found out when the verdict was reached, and it was brought up. This happened in Jacksonville, Florida. I've been looking for an article about it. But it's not hard to believe a gun with a body on it pops up. It's one of those cities with the highest unsolved murder rates. And yes, I was surprised as hell about it. He seemed like a good kid. Halfway through his senior year, good grades. And no, not with GameStop anymore. After this incident, LP came to town and started cleaning the house. The GM quit, AGM was fired, and I, the SGA, right under the AGM, was acting manager for a couple of months without any raise in pay. I was told I wasn't getting a promotion, but I would have to train the new managers coming in. I quit without 2 weeks' notice. Today, a customer brings in probably the grossest PlayStation 4 I've ever seen. I think, "Oh no, please don't have roaches." I hold it on end and tap it against the floor and nothing falls out, nor is there an rustling of things moving. No telltale signs. I take it in. My coworker decided he needs to find out why it is so dirty before cleaning it and opening it up. Inside is the world's first deluxe roach hotel. Managed to keep the hoard contained in the box the console was going in. That console is gone now. Why are people gross? I got scolded by management for helping a woman for 30 minutes. She bought 12 games and was looking for good recommendations for her son who was on the spectrum. I found every game on her list and a few more to surprise him. Those surprise games were Okami and Katamari Damacy. She was overjoyed that her son was going to have lots of good games to play. Why were they mad over such a large sale? Oh, because they weren't used. That woman wanted to make sure her son was happy, and I was tasked to do so. I know I did an excellent job, and you can close the shop. Never was an employee, but on the night Grand Theft Auto 4 came out, I was waiting in line and this kid rode up in the parking lot and started bragging about how he got the first copy and held his copy out the window. After about 10 to 15 seconds of bragging and holding it outside the window, another kid ran up from behind the car, yanked the copy from his hand, and ran into the woods behind the GameStop. They never found the kid who took it, and the kid in the car started crying immediately. Not a horror story, but it always makes me laugh when I think about it. I worked at a big box store similar to Best Buy when the Wii U first came out. After months of Wii U's being impossible to find, we finally had some stock in. I was helping another customer on a busy day when a guy stopped me to ask the price on the Wii U. Customer, how much is the Wii U console? Me, it's $400 CAD plus tax. Customer, yes, that's too much money, can you do any better on the price? Me, yes for sure, For you I can give it to you for $399.99. Customer, that's much better. I'll take 2. I was an ASM for about a year, had done retail before. Our store was right in between a fairly upscale touristy part of town as well as some of the poorer neighborhoods, so we got all sorts of people. I'll tell one horror story and then one uplifting story. The holiday season was in full swing, and we were always crowded. This particular day we had a few seasonal hires in to help with the workload, and I was behind the counter pulling games as people came up, to make the transactions faster. Then suddenly a smell hit the entire building like 100 cats had peed in the air conditioner and someone had tried to get it dry by stoking a fire with burning hair. My seasonals looked at me with a mix of confusion and terror as a family of 4 approached the counter, and it slowly became apparent that they were the cause of the smell. I'd been nose blind before from staying with an aunt who used to be an animal hoarder, but this was far worse. I sent my seasonals on break, grabbed the hand sanitizer, pumped a small mountain of it into my hands and as casually as possible smeared it on my upper lip, hoping my facial hair would hold onto it and block the smell. It mostly worked. I was already in holiday rush mode, but this was the fastest I ever got a used Xbox 360 and GTA 5 packaged and ready to go. When they left, we noticed that the store had actually cleared out of all other customers, who also couldn't deal with the odor. My SM came out of the back, gave me props for not embarrassing them, and promptly proceeded to fill our store with Febreze. Okay, one uplifting story. I know it's not what you asked for, but you're not the one making this post, so nah. We had our regular customers, and over time we would get to recognize a few people and have a general sense of what their interests were. Beyond just being salespeople and trying to pitch whatever was hot and new. Frequently we would also get people who knew they had 7 days or however long to trade a game back in for the full amount they paid for and would use us as a general rental service that way. We were supposed to flag their account, somehow, to stop this from happening, but it wasn't common enough at our location to really care. We weren't losing money and it was better than them stealing from us. One sort of grungy guy missing a couple of teeth would come in regularly, and he had a few different criteria. He owned a regular DS, he didn't have much money, and he wanted the games to be exceptionally long so they could occupy his time. Usually RPGs, but they had to have a delightful story. He'd bring it back if it weren't engaging and ask for something else. The first couple of times he did this I thought maybe he was trying to put one over on us, but the games he was picking actually were too long to reasonably finish in the time he would have them. I guess I could have checked the save files, but it wasn't that big of a deal. He disappears for a couple of weeks and then one day I'm working and I get a call, it's him. It's not too busy, so we chatted for a few minutes. He basically wants to pick my brain about what we've got that's less than $10 that will last for a month, and if it's worth his time to come get it because his money is so tight that just driving to our store and not finding something will be sort of a significant loss. This happens to be during a week when Dragon Quest IX is on sale for less than $10, and we have 1 copy left, so I set it aside and tell him to try it out. My wife isn't a big JRPG fan, but she tried it, and it held her interest for quite a while, so maybe this guy will like it too. He comes by, gets it, thanks me and leaves. I haven't seen him for months. He's one of those regulars who you start thinking about, whether or not you would really say you were acquainted, but just that general I hope they're okay sort of thing. Then one day he comes back wearing a full suit, grinning ear to ear. I recognize him right away and ask how things are going. He tells me they turned around and he got a job as a cook at a Sonic within walking distance from his house and had been able to save his money for a while, thanks to Dragon Quest being so long, and he wanted to say thanks and to buy his mom a PS3. He knew the only games she really recognized were classics, so we picked out one of the new Pac-Man games and Namco Museum. He was looking at the price tags of a couple of other ones and I could tell he was doing some quick mental math, so I told him pick the ones you're looking at and we'll see what we can make work. He gets one more game for his mom and brings them up to the front. It's been a few years since, so I honestly don't remember what if any promotions we had going on at the time, but wouldn't you know it? He got enough of a discount for some mysterious reason that he was able to afford everything, smiley face. I had a guy call me a terrorist. I am Middle Eastern. We had a buy 2 get 1 free sale on pre-owned games. He wanted to buy the 2 cheaper games and get the expensive 1 free. When informed that's not how it works, he flipped out. We had to call security in the mall we were in to get him to leave. He called corporate and corporate told us he was documented so any negative reviews in the next few weeks would be flagged. My manager stood up for me that day. I miss that guy. We also had a fire break out in the back room. Got rid of a lot of old inventory. Happened on Halloween. We were closed for a few days to clean. I used a fire extinguisher that day. First time ever. I worked at GameStop as an ASM and SM for 4-ish years. I have so many stories of creepy, scary, and rude customers. Some highlights: I once got asked out on a date at the register. I'm young, and naive, and awkward, and I kind of stop in my tracks and tell him that I'm working, and I can't answer that. I worked another 4 hours or so and close by myself, and he was waiting in the parking lot for me to leave. I had a family that would bring their son in every Saturday. They explained to me that he had severe autism, and he was nonverbal. No problem, except they would stand in a corner and text or whatever while he'd knock over stands, rip things from walls, and even run behind the counter and try to bite you. I had to get permission to ban them from the store, but I was tired of trying to not get bit. Edit, for some clarification, just because a customer was awkward does not mean to me that they were creepy. This guy was a special case, hence why I wrote about it. I met friends I will always love when they were customers. I met people I work with in the gaming industry in other capacities. I met my ex, etc. I am about to get my degree to specifically work and study children with disabilities. I have no problem being kind and patient with anyone, including children, but I don't want to be bitten by a kid that I have no way to protect myself, or my employees, from. If you all could stop sending me hate mail about being a nervous 19-year-old kid with a 40-year-old man leaning on her car at night, which would be awesome. Also, the other people's stories about seeing disgusting stuff are true. I saw more porn on Pavitas than I want to admit. I found drugs in game cases, and mostly I just saw a ton of systems filled with cockroaches. Day in the life, I guess. Person shrugging. I worked at Dairy Queen for a little while when I was in college. One day while I'm at the local gas station, while I'm waiting in line, a man about 50 to 60 years old strikes up a conversation with me and asks me where I work. I thought he was just being friendly. I started seeing him in Dairy Queen and I just thought he was a regular, because this was in an exceedingly small town with not much else around. But he stays much longer than the other customers, and always leaves when my shifts are over. Then he starts asking me out. I'm only 19, and I politely decline. Next time I work, he's not in the store, so I'm a little relieved. My shift ends, and I walk out to the parking lot, and he's in his van just staring at me. I run back inside, tell the fry cook, she has a daughter about my age, and she was always really sweet to me, and she runs him off. Never saw him again after that. I have no idea what she said to him, but I guess it worked. I worked for Simply, a company owned by GameStop. Simply offered 2-hour classes for old people on Apple software, like iMovie. We worked on commission plus $9.75 per hour, and we didn't get commission for doing classes, so nobody wanted to do them. The older customers were kind of racist, so as the only 18U white employee, I was forced to be the designated teacher. So, this 60-year-old photographer comes in and wants to learn how to make an iMovie with his photo shoots. Awesome, there goes 2 hours. We're looking at photos to import from his laptop for the movie, and he has me click on this folder, and as I import it, hundreds of images of women on dirty mattresses in a basement pop up on the screen. He starts talking in this pervy voice about how pretty and beautiful each girl was in the shot. His laptop screen is facing the entire store so anyone can just walk by and see. So, I taught him how to use iMovie and make a slideshow with his porn, and at the end of the 2 hours he tipped me $50, and I never saw him again. That was the most money I made in 2 hours there, ever. Former GameStop employee from NYC, I went on vacation for a week to see a friend. Decided to extend my stay a little while, and when I went to change my train ticket, I had no funds. When I pulled up my online banking, I noticed a large charge to Sprint under the name of my general manager. Apparently, she used my direct deposit info to pay for her overdue phone bill. She was arrested on fraud and fired. Worked there years ago during 2006 to 2009-ish. An adult guy came in and traded in a bunch of GameCube and PS2 games. One of them was a Mary Kate and Ashley game. The cases were clean, but we always wiped them down. When my coworker got to the MKNA game, I guess the Windex caused some sort of reaction because something came back to life and smeared all over the case. We threw the case away, lol. Another guy would come in and only buy Leisure Suit Larry games and the Dead or Alive volleyball games. We used to play the console testing TV from the back room, lol. It was a fun job, but some of the regulars. I have a lot more, lol. Oh god. So, I worked there like 5 years ago or so. This storeroom was long and was in a populated shopping complex. I was younger, like 19, and as a senior game advisor, I could close on my own. So, they left me to close around a popular holiday, I don't remember which one. Long story short, I had an extensive line at my single register, and a trio of gentlemen came in. One stood at the end of my line after browsing and picking something up, one was browsing at the front of the store. The last one snuck into the back room and stuffed his backpack with like 10 PS4 controllers, my personal iPad that was on the break room desk, and a stack of games. I almost got fired for not being aware of them sneaking in. The video, which only recorded behind the counter and the front of the store, showed how they are staying in a group and then spread out in specific spots, so I couldn't track them all at once, on top of the extensive line of customers I was overwhelmed with. They didn't have an alarm on the backroom door, which was my only defense that they listened to. I still miss my iPad. I used to work for BGAMS, GameStop in Canada, and worst horror story was probably getting hired 6 hours a week for a year and a half. Edit. Holy upvote. Let me add a bit more details. My shifts would often get cancelled since no one would shop at the store anymore, funny enough that the location isn't there anymore. There was a massive electrical fire in our store which caused the sprinklers to go off and flood our store. The firefighters couldn't get into the store for a bit because our district manager didn't tell us to give them the new key once we changed the locks. We lost a vast number of consoles, games, and collectibles. So, for about 3 weeks, they had us spending our time recovering our product in the most inefficient manner possible, with a bunch of 18 to 26-year-old man and woman, children scrambling about like headless chickens. Back before Christmas, in 2003, this kid of about 10 years came into the store with his mom, grandmother, and aunt. Each of these ladies had an envelope with a bunch of cash, and each had a list of the things he wanted. He walked around the store like a spoiled prince and was showing them all these things he wanted. After a few minutes, the grandmother came over and handed me the list asking for help finding these items. As I looked at the list, I noticed that it had 3 assorted colors of highlighter on it, green for the stuff he had to have, orange for the next in line if the item was not in, and yellow for the final item. I knew this because he had written a key to the list, and he also wrote the total amount of money that he had to work with, $500. Now me being silly and thinking all of these ladies working with the same list started helping the grandmother. We managed to have everything he wanted, and while ringing her up the aunt came over and asked if I could help her when I was done with her list. I said I already found all of the items for the first lady. She said that was one list and hers was different. I know my jaw was hanging open. I then got the list from the aunt and sure these were all different games and accessories. Also, with a total of $500. So, this list we only had about half of the things, some games hadn't even been released yet. The aunt looked very scared. She came back with the boy and his mother and told him he would have to pre-order some of the games since they aren't out yet and had me back her up on it. The kid proceeded to tell the aunt that she needed to pre-order all the games, pay in full, and buy him more stuff since he wouldn't have anything to open on Christmas. She told him that wasn't possible because she already paid a lot of money. He then calmly told her not to speak to him until after Christmas and that he doesn't love her anymore. Little man. Also, the mother had a list as well. She fared a bit better than the aunt though. Not a GameStop employee, but I worked at a Subway that was in the same parking lot as the GameStop. After working at that Subway, I became friends with some of the managers at that GameStop. I would give them free food, they would give me discounts on games. Anyways, one day one of the managers comes in after his shift and I ask him how his day went. He said that it went fine until the last few hours of his shift. Apparently, some guy came in asking to return a game that he got from a different game store, not GameStop, and asked for a full refund. When the manager said that the guy couldn't return it because it was from a different store and started yelling and destroying stuff in the store. Then the man pulled out a knife and started going to town on a cardboard cutout. After doing that, the man left without saying anything to anyone. Manager says that the man was probably high/drunk when it happened. I worked at EB Games in 2005. The important thing to note is that EB didn't use the term used for games, but instead used pre-played. I had a woman come in to buy Sniper Elite for her husband, but I didn't have any more sealed copies, just the gutted display boxes. She doesn't mind this and purchased it at the new game price. A few hours later, I get an angry phone call from a man who says I sold his wife a used game and charged her for a new copy. He explains who she was, and I tell him what happened. He freaks out and says that the game was opened, which makes it used. I let him know that we don't sell used games, we sell pre-played games, and assure him that the disc was removed from the case, sleeved, and filed, which means it has never been played and is therefore a new copy. He gets loud, asks me how old I was, 18, and goes off about how he is older than me and is a lawyer. He demands that he be refunded the difference between the prices, so I told him that my store manager would be in the next morning, and he could take it up with her. To my knowledge, he never called her, so I think he just gave up. I used to work at Woolworths. We had a similar thing, dummy boxes for new releases and the sealed units behind the counter, but sometimes we'd get products in that had no dummy boxes, so we'd have to gut the product. We called it master bagging, file the disc and manual, and put the empty case out on display. Enter a middle-aged man with a copy of Unbreakable on DVD that he'd brought from an entirely different branch. He'd got home, realized the disc was missing, so came into my store as it was nearer to his house for the disc. We didn't carry that film at that time. He said he'd brought it from my chain, but not that store, so you must have a copy. No amount of explaining was getting through to him. He was insistent that all your stores are linked, so you must have that disc there as it's missing from here. I offered him a refund, which was going well beyond what he was entitled to, but he was adamant that he wanted the disc because he'd paid for it and I'm not leaving until I get it and you're stealing from me. The security guard eventually got him to leave because he was making a scene, but he did come back a few hours later with a thick wad of paper of the statutory rights as a consumer which he'd printed off the internet, which he took great delight in waving at me. It wasn't even English, it was American. He could have just spent that time going back to the original store and getting the disc. I was working on the midnight release of Destiny 1 and mostly walking around and chatting. It was a fun night. Of course, I didn't have any hours for a few days after that, but when I came back in, the SGA warned me that a guy had been coming in and asking about me. He apparently even asked my female assistant manager where the female worker was. She said me, and he said no. The cute one then tried to get her number. Lo and behold, he called that night. In the middle of trying to check out a line of people, this man, who I talked to for maybe 5 minutes, called to talk and ask me out. I've never hung up on someone so fast before. Former employee, 2 stories come to mind. I was opening one day, not a morning person, and had barely opened my energy drink. A woman approached the counter, went uncomfortably close to my face and grabbed a Rick and Morty button we had on sale. She holds it up to my face and screams "Pickle Rick" and leaves. Probably cemented a resolve to not watch that show anytime soon. This one is going to sound not true, but it is. Thought I would never see one in the flesh, but a very stereotypical greasy nerd man in a trench coat came in one day. Naruto shirt and spinning a fake shuriken, just mumbling to himself. Man was in there for like an hour, didn't buy anything. I didn't help him out personally, but I was working close by as my co-worker did. One of the first things he says in front of him is, "Okay, so don't look like you are addicted to meth, even though you are addicted to meth. Meth is unfortunately a big problem in this area, so unsurprising." He then proceeds to have my co-worker look up some fairly obscure GBA games, sadly I don't remember exact title names, and making really weird statements about them, like that one actually predicted what's going on in our world right now. The last thing he told us was to get some special brand of Colombian coffee that gave you special abilities. Never saw him again after that. Honorable mentions go to a dude almost threatening me with violence when I had to inform him his hat that came with his MLB pre-order was delayed in shipping, a mom getting mad that I didn't know about some GTA mod where you could get a speeding ticket, finding a used positive pregnancy test on a shelf, and a neckbeard dude smugly insisting we wouldn't have GameCube controllers even when I held one right up to him. Former GameStop employee here. This story isn't really game related. 3 times I saw my manager toss a coin into the crack of one of my fellow employees when she would bend over. I'm not sure if this was a thing between them two, but her crack was almost always showing, and I never see her complain about it. A few months into the job I received a call that sexual harassment was filed against him. I'm guessing he was trying to fill a lot of coin slots. Worked at one while I was in college. It was a small town, so the customers were either students or out of the backwoods. We had this one regular that, as my manager put it, wasn't quite right. Well, he had to work on a farm because every time he came in he smelled like manure and cleared out the store. He would always trade in and out WWE games. He would say one of the divas on the cover was his girlfriend, on the PS2, and hang out in the store until his dad would get out of his truck, come to the door, and yell, "Let's go Bobby." It was never fun dealing with him in the store, but, I believe, it taught me how to be patient, and I'm grateful for that. A little late but former employee. A homeless-looking guy comes in early morning when I'm the only one there and says, "How much can I get for this?" While holding out a longish black box with an exposed wire coming out of the box. I look at him, then look at the thing in his hand and go, "What is that?" He then says, "How much?" I say, "I don't know, that is, what is it?" He says, "So how much can I get for it?" I says, "I don't know what it is. If I can't distinguish what it is just by looking at it, we probably can't take it." He says, "What if I beat your ass?" I say, "Interesting offer, but we still can't buy it." He flips me off and walks out. I still don't know what it was. I worked at GameStop years ago and I had a pretty sweet manager who gave me quite a bit of freedom in the sense of what you could tell a customer. Anyway, I get a customer and his wife come into the store one night and he asks about buying a PS3. We've got plenty in stock, both new and used. One problem, he mentions he wants to be able to play his old PS2 games on the new PS3. Most PS3s were not backward compatible. The ones that are rare and expensive, at least at the time. I try to tell this guy that the PS3s we have in stock were not backward compatible and no store in our region would ship us one if they had one themselves, because they would just as easily sell it to one of their more regular customers who walked in. I try my best to be nice about it and tell the customer that I had no problem selling him a PS3, but the ones I have aren't what he wants. If he wanted a regular PS3, I'd be happy to sell him one, but if he wanted one that was backward compatible he'd have to look at Craigslist or eBay. My manager had a pretty open policy about delivering the best results to potential customers, even if the sales do not happen at our store. Customers you treated well like to come back to the store, etc. This particular customer, however, becomes very offended by this statement and, not yelling but in a sort of aggressive and smug way, cuts me off mid-sentence and says, I don't want to sell him anything, and some other things I don't quite remember but were about me personally. I told him if he was unhappy with how he was treated, my assistant manager was just 3 steps away from me and he could speak with him if he pleased. He gets one of those sheepish grins and just walks away. Later that shift, maybe an hour or so after the incident, the same customer comes into the store and this time directly speaks to my assistant manager within my line of sight. In both instances we were sitting at adjacent cash registers, and started whispering and pointing towards me. My assumption was he was trying to get me fired. The assistant manager tells him the exact same story I gave him about what he wanted and what we had in stock, and the customer ultimately leaves us unhappy. The stupid kicker to this entire story is that I knew that Craigslist had a listing for a backward-compatible PS3 made that day he walked in, and if this man didn't take it so personally, I could have to the point in my sentence where I tell him exactly that. Oh well, GameStop sucks. I worked for Babbage's and Software, etc. back in the 90s. The sheer number of weird, creepy, socially inept dudes who would follow me, a teenaged girl, around or demand I go out with them was appalling. The worst offenders were like twice my age and would try to touch me. Gross. Some would even call when I wasn't there and ask my coworkers/managers for my number, or what my schedule was. Personally, I found it baffling. I'm not unattractive, but I'm also not a traditional beauty. Maybe that was why they thought they all had a chance. Girl next door looks equals attainable? I'm a dweeby myself. It's not like every awkward man freaked me out. Some of them were quite nice and just not great at social skills. But man, the contingent who just assumed I was low-hanging fruit or whatever was just astounding. Oh boy, this is my time to shine. I was the only female employee at our GameStop, which set me up for all sorts of dumb girl who doesn't know video games assumptions. I didn't mind that nearly as much as I minded getting hit on it though. This one guy who looked a lot like Louis C.K. would come in on the regular and try to chat me up while shopping. Eventually he came in just to talk to me, and then finally to bring me presents, the bottom of a Mountain Dew bottle filled with rocks and origami flowers and a hentai VHS tape. There were no words for that moment, honestly. I quit shortly after. Not an employee, but I was at GameStop in a not-so-great area a while back and there was a Spanish Karen there losing her control. Apparently she wanted to return COD Black Ops 3 because it was too violent for her little kid. But since you can't return brand new opened video games, they wouldn't give her the money back. She was yelling and screaming at them to take it back, this and that. The insane part is she said that she would be returned with backup and all this. She was literally threatening violence while saying she's against it in the game. Karen logic transcends language and culture. I worked at a GameStop that was frequently used as a daycare when parents wanted to go to the Walmart next door. There was a specific spot on our front window that kids gravitated towards like moths to a light bulb. Every once in a while, I just watch in disgust as some of the younger kids would lick this spot. I had a guy try to tell me that Skylanders and other games with portals were teaching our kids the ways of the devil with all the summoning you do in those games. I just nod and smile and agree till he left. There was a massive group of people stealing CC numbers and printing new cards with their names on them. They would come into the stores and try to purchase the Visa gift cards until we told them that they needed cash or debit. Then they would try to buy 3 to 5 PS4s at once. It was always PS4s. I worked at GameStop while I was in high school, and then again for a few years during university, 2 separate locations. In high school, I worked in a plaza that was across the parking lot from Walmart. In university, I worked in a location in a mall. I started working at the high school location when I was 16. I'm a girl. When I worked there, there was a guy who worked in the menswear store in the same plaza who came around all the time to talk to me about World of Warcraft. I thought he was a little weird, but ultimately harmless. I was young and naive, I guess. He asked me for my contact information a few times, but I always told him that store policy dictated that I wasn't allowed to give it out. I went for lunch one time and was sitting in the back room eating my sandwich and watching the cameras when the menswear guy came in. I watched him talk to my manager, and it got pretty heated. There was no sound on the cameras, but you could tell by the way they were talking. When the guy left, I came out and asked my manager what happened, and he said that menswear guy had asked after me and said some really inappropriate stuff. When informed that I was definitely a minor, menswear guy must have been in his 30s, I'd guess, he said he didn't care, and that prompted my boss to tell him he wasn't welcome back in the store. I never did find out the details of what inappropriate stuff he said. Same location once again, we were a pretty low-volume store, so a lot of the time, there was only one person working. It just so happened that I was working alone one day when some man came in asking to return a PC game. We couldn't return PC games at all. The return policy at GS was already pretty strict, but PC games were the strictest, because most of the ones we sold at the time still had activation codes in them, so once it was opened, the code was used, and it was yours. This guy seemed, I don't know, drunk or something. First he said he didn't like it, then he said it didn't work, then he claimed he'd never opened it, despite the obviously broken seal on the box. I told him that I couldn't return the game. Started yelling, cursing, threatening me, all kinds of things. And I was alone in the store at the time, just me and him. He literally attempted to lunge over the counter at me. It was kind of a SOSO moment in real life, and I remember asking myself as he was coming towards me whether I'd get fired if I punched him in self-defense. Thankfully, I didn't have to, because he was a rather rotund man and he bounced off the corner of the counter instead of going over it. Another customer came in, some guy built like a football player, saw what was happening, grabbed the man and literally threw him out. So, when I went to university, the mall location that I worked at was one of the busiest locations in the country. We had just got a new manager from this small, sleepy village nearby, and he had no idea what he was in for. It was I don't know, October or something when he started working there. We, the other employees, immediately told him that it was a little later than normal for hiring the Christmas temporary workers, but he still had time to get them in and trained on time, but he needed to do it immediately. He decided that we didn't need Christmas temperatures. His reasoning was that our current store has more permanent employees than his old store had, including temporary workers for the Christmas rush, so we would be fine. Except, for the fact that we were one of the busiest locations in the country. It was miserable. He did eventually admit his mistake, but not until it was way too late. Another story from the university store involves a pre-order gone wrong. So, this was for one of the Rock Band packs that came out, whichever one came with the keyboard, I forget. The publisher had originally announced skis for the game, a bundle with the game and a piano, a bundle with all the instruments, and then some of the instruments separately. We started taking pre-orders. Later, the publisher decided that they didn't want to produce the bundle that contained all the instruments after all, so we were forced to call all the people who pre-ordered that bundle to let them know. The problem with this is that people often provide their home landline number to us, so when we call, someone else, not the person who pre-ordered, will pick up, take a message, and never deliver it to the right person. It seemed that this is what happened to the lady who arrived on release day to pick up her pre-order for a bundle which didn't exist. I get it, that sucks for her. Still not a reason to throw the debit machine at me, though. Edit, wait, I forgot one. At the Plaza location where I worked in high school, we would often have parents come and drop their kids off at the store while they went to shop at Walmart. I didn't normally mind because the kids were usually old enough to be on their own for a little while, and hey, I remembered how boring it was to get hauled around doing boring shopping with mom when I was a kid. One mom ruined it for everyone, though. She brought her young sons into the store one evening. If I had to guess, the older of the two might have been 8 at most. The younger was probably 5 or 6. And she left them there. For 3 hours. They were fine for the first hour, playing on the demo machines, but they're just demos, the content doesn't last for that long. So, they played them all, got bored, and started wrecking themselves. One of them climbed a 4-way display and nearly pulled it over on his brother's head. I wasn't looking at the time, so I turned around when I heard the crash of it falling to the floor, and I was like, okay, that's it. You can't stay here anymore. I'm not a babysitter. Go to Walmart. There will be someone at the door, telling them that your mom needs to come to get you. They'll find her. They said they'd get into trouble if they left the store, and I told them they would get into trouble if they stayed, so off they went. Mom came back like a half hour later, kids in tow, in a fury, yelling at me for being so irresponsible as to send her children out into the dark parking lot alone. I threatened to call CPS on her for abandoning her children in my store, so she left. We no longer allowed children to stay in the store alone anymore. It's not GameStop, but it's in the spirit. I worked at Walmart for a while, and one of the sections I'd cover sometimes is electronics. 2 stories stand out to me. A man who came and wanted to see our Transformer video games. I had no clue they even existed, but he was quite thrilled to find out we had 2, if I recall correctly, and proceeded to spend the next hour and a half talking to me about his time with the Transformers and what all the battles were like. Man was convinced he was there. He was nice enough though, and eventually left of his own accord. 2 kids maybe 12 to 14 came in with a load of pocket change. You could tell they had been saving up. They spend a while at the display case and finally settle on a game, Lego Harry Potter. They came up to the cash all excited, and when I scanned the game the dread message check ID popped up. They saw it on the little screen for customers and looked so broken. You can be sure I typed that they were 18. Who put that age restriction on a freaking Lego game? Like fair enough if it's Battlefield or something violent, but my god, it's Lego. So, gamers have the stereotype of having really bad hygiene. The worst I ever experienced was the 23-year-old who smelled like he never showered in his entire life. He was a pretty hefty guy and smelled absolutely rancid. We had to literally hold our breath or breath out of our mouths in order not to cringe at the smell. When he left the odor didn't, and we had to go next door to ask for air freshener. The worst part was he was moving to Amsterdam in a day or two, and if he didn't shower and boarded the plane, I believe he would have killed someone. Not really anything to do with customers, TPH. However, I was shot at and held at gunpoint, and robbed at night while working at GameStop. They fought me tooth and nail to deny me workers' comp for the first 2 weeks. After that I took off. My manager also demoted me because I asked not to work nights for only 2 weeks once I returned, until I was comfortable again. The robbers came close to executing my ASM right next to me because the safe was on a timed lock, so they couldn't open it. The same group of robbers ended up hitting that same store 4 more times after I quit, because GameStop refused to hire adequate security. Not an employee, neither horror, but I was on fancy, basically my country's GameStop, and I witnessed an employee trying to convince a couple and their daughters that a Switch had retro compatibility with Wii U and Wii and even PS Vita, and he even dared to show a PS Vita and Switch cartridge to show them how similar it is. Apparently the parents were tech savvy and so were the daughters. That employee left the store and will only come back as a customer. My manager went on childbirth leave with his partner for 5 weeks. During that time I ended up managing the store by myself with a part-timer covering 4 hours on my Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday shifts. During said time found out my manager was returning a promo product, no barcode no warranty, for cash in hand with other staff members while I was out of the store, blatant embezzlement. Then found out the last 2 weeks was just him adjusting his hours, not actually taking leave. I ended up incredibly sick due to stress and leaving my job to post a meeting with him and the regional manager. Former employee here. One time a guy brings in a handful of plastic bags full of the least interesting PS2 titles. Like over 100. Do you know how deep the library goes for PS2? The largest collection of any console, by a considerable margin if I remember. The thing is, when you're trading them in for cash in the days of the 360/PS3, they're worth all. So, we cut the guy a deal right up front, something like $20 for the lot. Usually they each get scanned, then you get the total. But processing this mountain would have taken far too long, so it had to be put off for a bit. When we finally get to it. Roaches. Roaches everywhere. We were unwise enough to dump a bag on the counter, and easily a dozen roaches spilled out with the games. Obviously, we threw the entire lot out and intended to burn the dumpster, but you know, fire codes and whatnot. Another guy was a regular who would constantly pull the old, buy a bunch of terrible used games then return them the next week trick. Essentially, you can play all the games for free if you just return them within a week, provided they're used. He used to do the same thing with systems too. He very obviously had a drug problem and would buy a PS2 on the weeks he had money, then return it all / trade it in for cash a few days later. Rinse and repeat like clockwork. Eventually we had to cut him off and tell him he couldn't shop with us anymore. I'm sure he started going to another one on the other side of town. He was really off-putting to the other customers, no hygiene, super high, in a crack sort of way. Gotta feels a little bad for him, but that's not even close to an uncommon thing. We had a whole roster of people like this. Another time, we look out in the hallway and see a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, on Heelys flying through the mall, headed straight our direction. Time slowed to a crawl as we stood frozen and watched this kid slam face first into the wood and glass GBA/DS display case. Glass, cartridges, splinters, it was carnage. Then he gets up, turns around, and wheels back out into the mall. Dumbfounded, we were. So many of these, I could go on for a long while. Helped this guy on the phone for like 30 minutes just answering his questions about how to set up his PS3, game recommendations, etc. He called every day only asking to talk to me. Everyone I worked with knew who he was and covered for me saying I wasn't in. This man started coming to the store every week asking for my help only. Man was in his late 40s. Creepy looking MF. I was 20 at the time. I'm also a male. He eventually stopped coming in when I would hide in the back room. Someone came in to trade in his box of games. You could tell this guy was a heavy drug user. At the end of his transaction, he asked me if I wanted to party with him and his friends on the weekend. I quote, "Dude, you should party with us sometime. I have a really hot mom and you seem cool." No thanks, meth user. Grandpa comes in with his 11-year-old grandson in tow. He's holding one of the dirtiest Xbox 360s I've ever seen with one hand, and the tray is loosely popping out whenever he angles the console to point towards the ground. He goes up to the counter and he's like, "I want to sell this, how much will you take for it?" My assistant manager goes to start hooking it up to check and see if it works. The guy goes, "What, you can't take my word for it? The thing is brand new." My assistant manager told him that it was store policy to check it, and still the guy persisted. Now, this thing was the original Xbox 360. Even if the pounds of dirt and the loose disc tray hadn't given it away, the console itself would have. Nobody is going to pay $200 for a 360 in 2018. So, my assistant manager rings it up and is basically like, "Since it's defective, I can give you $16 for it." This set him off. He was like, $16? Are you kidding me? I bought this for $200. After yelling at my assistant manager, who was finding this exchange hilarious and was trying not to laugh, he turns to the other customers in the store. $50. Anyone want to buy this off me for $50? I don't think I've ever seen customers look that intently at the things on our wall than I did in that moment. They were trying so hard to look invested in what they were looking at so that the weird man didn't approach them. Afterwards, he threw another little fit. He took his grandson and left. Poor kid looked so scared and embarrassed. I worked at a GameStop in NYC for the holiday season during the Xbox 360 launch. Here is what comes to mind. Story 1. GameStop started taking reservations for the Xbox 360 in June of 2005. Come late October/early November, Microsoft let GameStop corporate know that their allotment of systems was going to be cut drastically. The rumor at the time was that Best Buy made Microsoft some kind of offer to get more systems. No idea if that was true. This meant that we needed to call people who reserved in July/August, and later, that they were not getting a system on launch day like we promised. I received at least one death threat per day from the customers. The store did take the threats seriously and we had armed security for the midnight launch. We were warning people to not take the subway. Make sure they had a ride ready to pick them up. Don't walk, don't show the box, etc. No incidents, thank God, but I was on edge the entire time. Story 2. Since it was the holidays, we dealt with a lot of cash. It is standard practice in retail to make daily deposits. This was the holidays, and we really didn't want to have a bunch of cash on hand, so sometimes we would make 2 or 3 deposits on a given day. My manager, super awesome Trinidadian lady, told me after a month of working there that it was my turn to make one of the daily deposits. This was the middle of my shift, and I was confused as to why now. She explains that she needed to change the time and employees for the deposits because sometimes there was a van outside and she was fairly sure it was keeping an eye on the place looking for patterns in our deposit schedule. So, she hands me an envelope in a standard bank leather zipper bag with $22,000 in it. I had never seen so much cash in my life, and tells me and one other guy to walk 3 blocks to the bank and deposit it with this pre-written deposit slip. I stuck it into the inside of my jacket and set out for the bank. It was a tense walk. I have more light-hearted stories if anyone wants to hear them. Not a GameStop employee here, but a friend of a former one. They'd just gotten a shipment of pop vinyl figures, and I was there looking for some particular ones that were a bit harder to get my hands on. Doctor Who, Kingdom Hearts, a few blank ones for customs. Stuff like that. In walks a few kids. No problem. Me and my friend, the actual worker here, converse. Let's point it out. My friend is an 8 out of 10 girl, but I'm gay, so she was always open to talking to me. Manager knows me too, so nothing was wrong with us chatting. It wasn't busy, and I'm a paying customer. The kids looked around, picked out a few items, and seemed to talk amongst themselves. One of them seems to be looking for something, so my friend, being the great person she is, goes up to help him. She asks what he was looking for. Kid number 2, the one looking for something, asks where the Switch games are. Friends point them out. Kid number 1, who was behind her now, slaps her ass. Needless to say, parents were called, and they were forced out. My friend still working there, but she tends to not leave the front desk as often as she would before. Not GameStop, but remarkably similar store that buys and sells games, DVDs, and tech. Among the things I saw, used condom in a DVD case. More than once. Bag of needles left on the floor, dog shit, I hope, caked onto a PS3. They tried to trade in multiple boxes full of shit old DVDs from the garage that would come to literal pennies for the seller. It cost us more to take and sort them than they would sell for, that the seller still insisted on me checking and scanning. This happened a lot and would take me hours. Customer would walk away with 50p. People I saw, women who came in with stolen brand new DVDs every week. But she was polite, so I liked her. Crazy bag lady who thought working in a tech store would cause electric energy to fry my brain. So many people who just full on stank. Like, holding my breath while I served them stank. If you have ever been to a tech store and thought it smelled horrible, I promise it's not the staff's fault. They paid me exactly 5p above minimum wage for under 21s. I was overworked and undertrained. Worst job I ever had. Not GameStop, but I worked at Best Buy back in like 2001/2002, Federal Way, we location. A kid I went to school with and was friends with worked with me. Dunno what happened, but he just randomly became a senior year. Got fired for stealing. The idiot tried to come in near opening when we were lighter staffed and had a bunch of new employees on shift. The guy comes in and tries to buy about $1,500 in stuff with his employee discount, a few digital cameras, memory cards, DVD players, CDs, and a bunch of PS2 games. Even though he was fired, thought maybe no one would notice. Of course the discount wasn't going through. When he's told he won't heed the discount and he needed to either buy everything there at retail or get out, the 18-year-old kid literally throws a tantrum, throws all the merchandise onto the floor at full strength and starts stamping buy on everything. Runs out of the store and gets detained security before he gets out of the door. The most bizarre part was a bunch of his friends/family and his mom, face with tears of joy, come in and cause even more of a scene talking about suing Best Buy for assaulting her son, etc. Dude's mom was the ultimate Karen. When Fortnite first got big, we had this older lady who always came in with her grandkid minutes before close. I'm talking 8:58 p.m. and we close at 9 p.m. Well, the kid needed V-Bucks, so the grandma would buy him whatever. Well, she'd buy him $10 for XBL, but then find out there's tax on the Xbox marketplace. She was floored by this. She comes back complaining, saying we need to warn people there is tax on the marketplace and we need a sign or something. I asked her if she thinks we need this for all stores that tax their goods, and she told us no, just that we should inform all guests that online purchases are taxed, as if this is a new concept. We literally had to explain taxes to this woman, all while her grandkid is screaming for more stuff. Later we found out this kid gave up his XBL login to some other kid online with the promise of hard-to-get skins on Fortnite. The password got changed and everything, so she had to call XBL support to get it back. She insisted we should warn parents and guardians of that too. Lady, we are just selling this stuff, you need to educate yourself in it. It's called parenting/grandparenting. I haven't seen that lady in a long while, so maybe she got tired of us questioning her lack of knowledge. I opened up the store alone. I was a new hire, direct to manager for no reason and no experience, and it was Tuesday. Already had a small line outside for whatever games were coming out. I couldn't get the breaker box open to turn on the lights, so I had to call the GM. She said open the store with the lights out and work on the line. I start the line, but the first man was with a Kmart bag full of 360 games, accessories, and the console itself. Rang it up, he said he wanted cash. I did not have that much in the register as I just opened. Safes had a 3-minute timer to open. He wouldn't stand aside during this process. So, I emptied out all the registers and gave him his bad deal and didn't have change for the other people using cash. Former employee here, and 2 stories come to mind. On my first Black Friday shift, this one guy came in to trade in a whole bunch of Skylanders figures, like 2 grocery bags full. This was at a time when Skylanders was relatively new, so there was no streamlined way to get them all in the system. Since I didn't know the characters, he had to look them up on the website while I dug through the system for them. It took about 30 minutes to get through all of them, and the receipt was around 6 to 7 feet long by the end. Following that guy, there was a line that went to the back of the store for the majority of my shift. The second story was about this one guy that came in with 2 kids. I think the guy was purchasing a console or other expensive item. Meanwhile, the younger kid really wanted some Minecraft torch toy that we had. Instead of buying the torch or just telling the kid no, he brought it up to the front, decided not to pay for it, and had me pretend to put it into the bag so that his kid would think he was going to get it. I felt awful for that kid, and really had to question what was going through the guy's head that made him think that was something okay to do. On several occasions we've had to dodge cases thrown at our heads by somebody unhappy with their previous purchase. One day a guy wouldn't stop crank calling our location, badly too lol, and the SM blew up and called him a lonely virgin who has nothing better to do than waste other people's time and masturbate to hentai, not to mention the unwashed masses. The worst part is that some of them were genuinely nice/funny, but oh god, the hygiene. One time I had a kid who was left in the store, mall location, and every time I was helping someone he would walk up and say sir really loudly to get my attention, just to tell me he's stuck on a part on the demo machine. A guy tried to trade in a phone, we asked him to unlock it and he said, no can do, I don't know the pin. Is this your phone? Nah, found it outside, thought I could get some cash. We got to watch a police officer chase him around outside before 2 others caught him. The 2 guys who would always come in and buy JRPGs, and then talk about all the perverted mechanics in said games, right in front of everyone else, and how it's disappointing how you can only get the good stuff from Japan. The only good thing I got from working in that place was these stories, I swear. One day during the Build-A-Bear, Pay Your Age Day, my store is in a mall, I was called in early because we were both understaffed and the store was terribly busy. Our BAB ran out of bears, so parents started bringing disappointed children to our store, so they didn't go home empty-handed. Crying, loud, messy children everywhere. I'm fixing the switch wall, which is always a kid's first destination, and I smell something horrid. I look down, and there is dirt everywhere. Some mothers saw their kids sit on the floor, and instead of cleaning it or informing me, she just left, and customers trekked it all over my sales floor. I almost vomited. Thankfully, my coworker returned from his lunch and helped me clean it. Was browsing games in the mall and there was an attractive customer at the desk talking to the clerk, who was your basic stereotypical basement-dwelling nerdy guy. Look, not trying to be mean, I'm trying to paint a picture. She had 3 or 4 games she wanted to purchase new, but when she was rung up, it was $200, and she said she didn't have that much. She just said, is there any way it can be cheaper? Are there any coupons or discounts I am missing? And the guy, obviously in awe of the woman talking to him, hit a few buttons on the keyboard and said, how about $160? Wow, thank you so much, and she digs through her purse, oh I only have $120. And she makes no effort to put anything back, just stands there, what can I do? Can you help me? The guy took one game out of the case, scanned some things, and gave her the game out of the plastic packaging, and just said, that should do it. He stole a game and gave it to her. Then as she walked out, she handed the bag to some man who was waiting for her outside. He didn't even go in. I could have asked for the same discount since I saw it all and gave the man a tough time, but I just wanted my game and left. It was uncomfortable to watch this guy turn into a pudding sequel nothing for no beneficial reason. Worked at GameStop as my second job ever, around 16. Boss was a 30-something schlump hobbit of a man we'll call Scott, because that was his name. Scott loved to brag about any and everything and had seemingly done it all. Luckily for me, one of the things Scott had done was work at a car dealership, so when I locked my keys in the car one night, he assured me he got this, and walked outside leaving me to look at the register. He returned 5 minutes later with a smug grin on his face and my keys. I was really grateful until I went to my car to go home later and, grabbing the door handle, pulled it off when I tried to open it. He had pulled the entire handle off, disconnecting it from the metal pieces that actually opened the door. Good news, I never locked my keys in my car again. Sad news is, I couldn't lock anything in my car, because you could just reach inside the door and pop the lock and handle from the outside from then on. Not GameStop, but the equivalent in Australia, and the reason I quit. It was a family-run, pretty quiet store in a small town. The only people who came through were regulars, so everything was pretty tight-knit. I worked with my boss often, and whenever I worked with him, one of his friends/his girlfriends would come and sit behind the counter and just hang out. I thought that was super weird and unprofessional, but whatever. There was this one guy, looked almost double my age, 5-inch nothing, who smelled like cheese and feet, who was apparently my boss's friend. Every time he came into the store, which was almost every day, he would never stop talking to me. Even when I was serving customers, and my boss never bat an eye. This in itself was annoying, but things started getting super weird when he started touching me inappropriately, putting his hand on my back, telling us to compare hand sizes, allotectomy. I felt so uncomfortable, but felt I couldn't say anything because he was my boss's friend. I was awkward, shy, and like 18, so I just did my best to tolerate it. It wasn't until I had just started my shift, and the guy came in right as we opened, started talking to me despite my obvious gestures to get him to realize I wasn't interested, and my boss standing on the opposite side of the counter on his phone. This guy called me over and grabbed my arm with both hands, telling me how cold my body was, and then told me to hold his arm because he was so warm. He gestured me to do it twice more that day. By this point I was about ready to have a massive anxiety attack. I looked up at my boss as a "oh my god, please help me," and he looked at me, then just looked away and kept texting. I ended up leaving early to get away from him. I was having huge chest pains and genuinely thought my heart was going to fall out of my throat, so my boyfriend drove me to the hospital. They did an ECG, and everything was fine, and basically told me I was having a really long anxiety attack. I quit the next day. I worked at a high-volume GameStop, what would now be called a prestige store, near a university back in 2007. For some background, I've loved games all my life and took the position as a second job to get some extra cash for my upcoming wedding. Husband was finishing his master's and didn't have time to work. I graduated in 2005 and worked with all 19 to 20-year-old dudes. I am female. 2 stories come to mind. Once this mother comes into the store absolutely livid, with what looked to be a 10 to 12-year-old boy in tow. She demanded to exchange a used game that he purchased just a few hours before. Apparently it was demonic and had wizards and witchcraft in it. I so wish I could remember what the game actually was. She tells the kid to go pick a different used game, and he comes back with Grand Theft Auto 3. "I want this one," he says to mom, who looks at it and decides that this is an okay purchase for a kid who's 12, but that age in a game is not. I tried to explain to her what the ESRB ratings meant and that I wouldn't be able to even sell the game to him without an adult, but she said that as long as it didn't promote Satan that she was okay with him getting this game instead. Yes, this story does indeed take place in the Bible Belt. The other was with a coworker. This young college kid was always insinuating that I was somehow not really into games by testing my knowledge to see if I was a real gamer. I was in my late 20s and well past the point where things like this bothered me, but it was still incredibly annoying to work with him. One day he quoted a line from Scrubs, probably my favorite show of all time, and I finished the quote along with him. He replies, "Wow, I'm surprised you like Scrubs. Every line of that show is written by a man," the implication being that the lowly female brain could never hope to comprehend the intellectually charged and male-written humor of Scrubs. Good times, good times.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.